Welcome to the Reflections Cast, where we invite you to join us in an exploration of the teachings of our dad, Skip Ross. In each episode, we will listen to a talk or lecture from Skip, and then discuss what we might be able to apply to our daily lives and reflect on how they can inspire us to grow and change. We hope to continue his legacy and join our listeners in finding new insights and perspectives. Here's episode 1, What is Love?
I am Melody.
And I'm Steven.
And we are so excited to have you guys joining us for the inaugural episode of the Reflections podcast. This is something that we have had in the works for quite some time as we've been thinking about how to continue the legacy of our dad and of Circle A and of dynamic living and of all of the things that he left in the world and how to join the community that has learned from him for so long. So we are really excited to be kicking this off and so grateful that you guys are joining us on the journey.
Absolutely. This idea in particular, we've just been talking about it and bouncing the name around and kind of connecting it all together. And obviously there's the standard definition of reflections of just reflecting on these talks and these ideas, giving a little bit more depth. But there's also the aspect of our camp at Circle A, where this was also the name of the last night where all the kids would get together up in the auditorium. We'd have a really just nice time hearing from almost every single camper, sometimes multiple times, reflecting on their experience with dynamic living and their experience with the camp and what's meant to them maybe over multiple years. So we wanted to give reference to that. And then also just a reflection of ourselves. Do we see ourselves in these teachings and perspectives from Skip? So that's where the name comes from.
Yeah, and we're super excited. I mean, we've got a lot of goals for this podcast, but I think one of the main goals we have is just to really connect with the greater Circle A community, the alumni that have been through the program over the years, with the greater business community that Skip had such an impact on throughout his life, and to just really encourage and inspire everyone who was touched by Skip's life. And then also, we really have a goal to continue the focus on the next generation of leaders. And that was always something that was really, really important to Dad. And so it's important to us too, especially, in this moment in our culture when we are really facing some big changes as a civilization in so many different aspects of life. One of our goals for the future of Circle A is to prepare the pioneers of possibility. And so you guys are going to be hearing a lot more about that as we go on. But the Reflections podcast, this particular podcast, is not going to be geared so much towards the young people, although definitely young people are welcome to listen to it, and we hope that they'll enjoy it as much as we do. But this is actually geared more toward adults and to those of us who really learned a lot from Skip. We just want to take time to kind of take little bits of his teachings and just unpack them and talk about how they have, how we've seen them true in our lives, how we've seen the lessons that he taught us come to life over the years, and then how they've, made a difference to us. And so our goal here is to not only have Steven and I be the ones who do these reflections, but to invite the whole community to be a part of it. So we will explore that as we grow, but we're really excited to get it started.
Yeah. And because I like to just I won't say a wrench. I like to maybe derail, maybe go off trail a little bit. I have questions that I will probably throw in there from time to time throughout the episodes. But my history with this material is something, I've been applying and learning this stuff my entire life. And yet I am still far, far from an expert. And so exploring these questions has always been something of great importance, curiosity to me. How do we really get the most out of this content? And the history behind why we do podcasts or why we do this sort of material stems from probably, at least for me, we've got a whole community here that is creating incredible content for Circle A. But my personal journey started probably in college. I had been a part of the leadership team for a little bit, and I was seeing kids that were coming into the program, learning these life lessons, changing their trajectories, making goals, going back into the world, and then the world just kind of beating them back into submission and just making them feel like, no, you can't do that. That's not what you're here for. And then they'd come back to camp and they would be so emotional. They would hear all this positivity, be in that environment again, and be filled up with all this excitement. And then we would sit down at things like reflections and say, I don't know how to go back to my school. I don't know how to go back to this relationship without this community, without this environment. So the podcasts were really a way that we could reach out from where we were at Circle A into their home lives. And yeah, we hope to do the same with this podcast as well. We pursued it from a number of different podcasts. We had the DLX podcast for a little while. Definitely aimed for kids. It was a fun time.
It was
amazing.
We had
a lot of fun with it. We'll see how many of those continued to make the light of day. But I think we could definitely break down some of them in the future.
Absolutely.
And reflect on some of those teachings. So we started the DLX podcast back in 2006. And back then, podcast was only termed in 2004. And there were very few that were trying to push high definition video out to people on a weekly or monthly basis. So we were very proud of that content, regardless of how goofy we were during it. And we also had a social network, DLX Nation, for a little while. We then, in 2009, transferred to a daily podcast with Skip called Daily Disciplines with Skip. And we were really trying to encapsulate those messages as tight as we could so that it was something that people could benefit from daily. And then we realized Skip had that idea years ago with a series called Say Yes Every Day. So we re-recorded that, put that out in 2011. And I think it was around that time that we started working on other methods of reaching people in their homes with things like the Thrive Project or the study series. And all of those pursuits we're very proud of. I think that they definitely deserve further discussion. But to sum it up, I think that Dad always really understood the power of keeping this community alive, regardless of where they were, that Circle A was not a place. It was a message. It had a purpose throughout their lives as they were home. So that's where our mentality towards this podcast comes from as well, of just reaching out. And obviously we want your feedback too, but we'll get into that later as we move along.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really awesome to be able to connect with the greater community again, like Stephen was saying, to, feel like we are kind of a family, because that's always how it felt at Circle A, and many of the business spheres that Dad was involved in. It was a community, it was a family. And so that sort of environment, keeping ourselves immersed in it, engaged with it, really helps all of our lives. It'll help my life, it'll help our family's lives, it'll help Stephen's life, and hopefully it'll help your life too. And I just want to say, if you're listening to this podcast, you're in the family. Whether you've been to Circle A or you've been a part of business ventures with us or with Dad, or however you might know us and have come to this podcast, you are invited. Dad always said that the name Circle A came from the idea that the world drew a circle that left me out, and God drew a circle of love that invited me in. So we just want you guys to know that you are invited into the circle, into this family and community. And we're just really excited to dive into some of the lessons that we've learned. And part of our goal, like Stephen said, we want to stay grounded in Skip's teaching. So we are going to actually listen to him teach us for each episode. But then the reflection part is going to be more of, okay, what have we learned from this teaching? What new insight can we find about this teaching in today's world? Because the world has shifted. Even in the last 5 years, we live in a different world than we did when Skip gave these teachings. So what new insight can we find? And then what of this content needs to be translated or even reimagined for the next generation? Because we want to continue to communicate the truth of all that we've learned from Skip. So that's where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. Like Melody said, you are invited here, and we invite that feedback to come in. You can always like, share, subscribe, comment on our podcast on any platform that you're listening to. We do have a YouTube channel that will be accessible for comments as well. So stay plugged in, and we are very excited to get this thing on the rails finally, after many, many years of trying to figure out exactly what this podcast is really all about.
So we are just going to give you a little preview about the future of Circle A, and we're going to continue to do that throughout this podcast because we do have some specific visions, specific goals, and initiatives that we are beginning as part of Circle A. So the Reflections podcast is the first piece of that. And so we're very excited to be launching that with this episode. The second piece of that is the Circle A Summit, which is going to be our annual gathering for anyone who wants to be a part of a live in-person event. And then the last piece is going to be the Pioneer Circle. So we launched the Pioneer Circle at the summit this year, and you're going to be hearing more about that. But if you want to check out details about the Pioneer Circle, you can visit circleacamp.com/pioneers. And there's going to be a lot of exciting information for you to find. All right, so we are very excited about this particular launch date for this podcast because we're launching on June 13th, which is the 2-year anniversary of when Dad went to heaven. And of course, that's an emotional moment for us, but it's mostly like good and beautiful emotions because nothing would make him happier to know that 2 years after he's gone, his work is being passed on through the lives of his family, through the lives of the Circle A community and the business community. And really, this was his ultimate goal in life, is that, you know, his work, his body of work would outlive him. And so we feel like it's really beautiful to be able to launch this particular episode on this particular day. So thank you guys for joining us. So before we jump into our teaching from Skip, we want you to get to know us a little bit better since we're going to be your host for this podcast. And we've been maybe a little bit quiet over the last few years as we have transitioned what we're doing with Circle A. So we just want to tell you kind of a little bit about where we are and what we're doing with our lives now so that you can know us as we dive into these teachings together.
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Go for it.
So let's see. Where have I been? I would say that probably I've stepped back a lot since we kind of ended a lot of the more online media that we had been producing. Simply because I would say for me personally, probably around 2015, I felt very disillusioned with pursuing the internet as a medium for reaching people, simply because we had done so much work pulling everyone just with everything we could to get on the internet so that we could connect with them. And then once we got everyone on the internet, it got really hard to be on the internet. And so I kind of took a sabbatical from that, focused on personal life, personal goals. And when we started Thrive, it really did give like these vehicles to take Circle A into their homes, into their communities. And I was very proud with that aspect of it. So since then, we located a bunch of the different locations that we then branched out into. We could see that there was an end coming for the Michigan campus of Circle A. And so we got ahead of it, found some really awesome locations, and had some absolutely incredible summers at different locations. And that culminated in a Colorado experience where, it was a dream team of a staff. Financially, the first time Circle A was ever successful. Dad got to record the Love Seminar in a truly unforgettable way. And yeah, there were a lot of different life situations. Dad, we eventually found out, had cancer. So he was going through a lot of treatments with that. We tried to tone it down in 2019, which worked out really well. It got us into the live stream venue, and pandemic made live events kind of an interesting struggle that really took out a lot of camps. And we were very blessed and thankful that allowed us to negotiate those things. And I think that Melly and Chris with the virtual Circle A really kept things alive and thriving on the internet. Now I am a father of two. We have a wonderful life that we are very proud of. And my position and purpose with this material, I don't think it's changed. I still want to make it as accessible and as engaging as we can. And I think that this podcast is long overdue. It's something that is so necessary for Skip's teachings. So I like that we can take this time to really break down these teachings that we've thankfully recorded and saved so that we can explore them together on this podcast. I think it's going to be a really fun time.
Yeah, it is for sure. I totally agree. I think as far as me, I've maybe stayed a little bit more involved with the ongoing summer Circle A program, whatever it turned out to be over these last years since we left Michigan. We loved the summer camps that we did in Colorado and North Carolina. And then when we had to transition away from that, I was really thrilled with how well virtual Circle A did go. And of course, everyone was doing everything virtual in 2020 because that's all you could do. But still, it was so cool to see all of these teams around the world gathering together every week, led on Zoom by these superstar LTs and going through Thrive and other teachings from Dad, and just continuing to benefit from his teaching and continuing to benefit from the community. So as we started to face Dad's health challenges and face the fact okay, well, we're not doing in-person camp in 2020. We're not doing it in 2021. Now we've lost Dad. And so what are we doing? What does the future actually look like? What's been so amazing is that it's never felt like it's just up to Stephen and I to carry this on. There have been people, you are the people, you listening, who have continued to invest time into studying what Dad's taught, into keeping relationships alive with Circle A friends and family. I'll just give one shout out to Team Canvas, which hopefully you guys are listening. But Team Canvas is a group of, how shall we say, senior LTs? I don't know. They're not seniors yet, but they're my senior. They were my LTs. Let's put it that way. So they were a few years prior to my being an LT at Circle A. But a group that got together during our first virtual Circle A year and enjoyed it so much that they have continued for the last 3+ years to meet every single month. And they have studied all the virtual Circle A stuff that we've put out. They've studied other stuff by Skip. And now they do a monthly reading group where they just read all kinds of amazing books together and discuss. And so I've been able to be a part of that group over the last year or so. And it's just so awesome to show up on Zoom with a group of people who I haven't seen in person, except maybe for Dad's funeral. I haven't seen in person in 10, 15 years, 20 years, but they're still my family. I can still be honest about my life with them. And there's just a bond that we share because of our experience at Circle A and what we've learned there. And so seeing that community continue to flourish has really given me a lot of hope for what can come next. Because I know that it can happen and because I know that it's not just up to Stephen and I to do it. So we're just so excited to see where it goes. Personally, I have continued to be very busy with many things. I've been a pastor for the last almost 10 years of our church here in Florida, Element Church. And so that's, been a huge, huge part of my life. We've continued our video business and our Amway business. And then our girls are growing. Chris and I have 2 girls, and they are 14 and 11 now. So that's pretty crazy. But we are so excited, like as they get to this age where, we know we only have a few years left with them in our house. And so to be able to kind of really focus our family's lives and efforts on this content and on bringing them to the Circle A Summit and on introducing them to the Pioneer Circle, like it's just definitely given me a lot more energy to, really put into this work because I'm doing it for them too. So that's a little bit about me. I think, what I'm personally hoping to get out of this podcast is that sense of community for sure. And it's also to get new insights from Dad's teaching, because even as I've been preparing to record this podcast and listening to stuff that I know I've heard him say a million times, and I know it's in me somewhere, like this learning is in me and it has influenced my life. Also, I needed to hear it. Like I needed to hear it today as I was preparing for this podcast. Like no matter how many times you hear this stuff and learn this stuff, you can always apply it to what you're going through in the current moment. And so to be honest, like I'm planning to get a lot for myself out of this podcast from listening to Dad and from listening to you, because we really hope to have you guys joining us on the podcast. As far as what I'm bringing, like, I just want to be clear that I am not bringing my dad's wisdom or learning to this podcast. I am not my dad. I am a student of my dad and a student of a lot of people. And so I hope to bring some of my own wisdom, some of my own learnings, but I know Stephen feels the same way. We are not trying to take the place of Dad. We're not trying to speak with his authority or clout on any of these subjects, because I don't have that authority or clout or wisdom on any of these subjects. But what I'm bringing is a desire to keep learning and to keep learning together. And I'm really excited for what it's going to do in our lives.
Yeah,
So.
I think that just opening the door to the discussion is keeping that legacy of education alive. It is hard to find places where you can really delve into this kind of stuff in a meaningful way, especially from Circle A's perspective, especially for kids. The wonderful thing about the episode that we're about to get into, and I will just touch on, our introductions to these episodes will not be quite this lengthy in the future, but we wanted to make sure you guys knew who we were and what this was all about as we delve into all of these incredible seminars that Skip has available for us. But this one in particular is one of his great highlights of the Circle A experience. We call it the Love Seminar. It's not going to be the full Love Seminar. Any of you guys who have experienced the Love Seminar know how lengthy it is. It's when you know Skip is doing the Love Seminar, there is like a protocol of the staff at camp in terms of what the kids are going to be like, how the day is going to be scheduled, just to make sure that they get the most out of that day with Skip. But this is kind of a little excerpt talking about what love is really all about. It's got some really powerful points, some really powerful questions. I'm excited to just delve into it, to start that discussion, see where it takes us. So, Melody, if you have a segue into the teaching, take us in.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. And it's just going to be a little 10-minute segment about Dad talking about what love is. And so we're going to jump right in. We're going to listen to him talk, and then we'll be back with you to unpack some thoughts.
There is somebody in your life now, or will soon be in your life, who will seek to manipulate you with the concept of love. And it works a lot of the time because we misunderstand what love is really all about. We said when we began this discussion that love is a decision. But there are a lot of people who confuse it with feelings. Now, there certainly is feeling in a loving relationship, but love cannot be defined by a feeling. Once in a while, we hear people say it was love at first sight. It was probably more feeling at first sight, attraction at first sight. Love comes as a result of a decision a decision based upon a lot of things in our lives. But one of the feelings that people confuse with love is the feeling, or the action that's built into this is kindness. There are people who believe that kindness is love, that showing kindness is showing love, and certainly love includes kindness. But I would encourage you not to confuse kindness with love. Simply because someone is kind to you does not necessarily mean that they love you, even if they tell you they love you. If the kindness they show is only to manipulate you and get you to do what they want you to do, then it is not love. It is human manipulation. Now, whether we talk about that in terms of the little child who learns rather early in life that to be kind to daddy or to mommy, oftentimes we'll get mommy and daddy to do what the little one wants them to do. When nothing else works, oftentimes that kindness, even the kindness that utters the words to mommy and daddy, I love you. Now, when the little one says, I love you, mommy, I love you, daddy, and they are using it as a manipulation tool, it does not mean they don't love mommy and daddy, but they have learned already at that early stage in life that that phrase is a very kind and desirous phrase by a mom and a dad, and it can be used to influence them to do whatever the child wants them to do. And all of you, I think at probably some point in your life, have gone running to mom or dad and been very nice to them, done what they wanted you to do. And it had nothing to do with loving them. It had to do with getting them to do what you wanted them to do. It's called manipulation. Now, whether we talk about the little child who does that, or we talk about the internet predator who does that, sometimes people have never been told, have never had affection shown, and so the first person that comes into their life that shows any affection that says, I love you, they are convinced that that's what love must be, and because they are starved for it, remember, one of the basic human desires is to be loved, we allow ourselves to be pulled off track and to do something because of an act of kindness which had nothing to do with kindness, it had to do with manipulation. So I encourage you not to get confused by that. If someone says, I love you, and then says, if you love in return, you will do this, understand that is manipulation. It is not love. Whatever it is, it's not love. I will love you if you will do this is not love. I will love you when you do that is not love. I love you because is likely not love. When Susan and I were first getting acquainted, it was obvious that our lives were moving toward marriage. She began to say, why do you love me? And I simply said, I love you, period. She said, but why? Now that was 44 years ago. I know that's difficult for you to imagine, and that I'm only 26, but somehow I've managed to work those two figures together. 44 years ago, she asked me for many years. Not once in those 44 years have I ever told her why I love her. I will never tell her why. Because the moment I give her a why, if she ever doesn't do the why, she will begin to doubt my love or fear the loss of my love. And because love is a decision, she never needs to be afraid of losing my love. It's not about feelings. It's not about affection. It's not about passion. It includes all of those, but it's all about a decision. And yesterday, when we talked about God's kind of love, that's the kind of love we're talking about. That's the kind of love that does away with fear. Love that manipulates people creates fear. If I am afraid that I will lose somebody's love, and I do things I wouldn't otherwise do just in order to try and keep their love, I am acting out of fear, not out of love. So as we move on from our discussion from love, understand that it is the kind of love that simply loves and allows others to be who they are that we're talking about. It's not manipulative feelings or affections or passions that love is all about. So many of the songs that we hear sung and many of the books that are written about love are not about love at all. They're about some sort of imitation of what real love is all about. I encourage you to make sure that you get into that real loving relationship in life. It is one of the most beautiful experiences that God created for mankind. True success of our lives will not be judged by those who admire us for our accomplishments. Oftentimes people think that the way by which I am lovable is when I do the right thing. The responsibility, I asked the question on Saturday, is the primary responsibility for love on the lover or the lovee? The one doing the loving or the one being loved? And for me, the primary responsibility of love is on the lover, because it's a choice. It does not depend upon the behavior or the attitude of the other individual. I can love somebody even if they hate me. I can choose to love somebody even if they abuse me. I can choose to love somebody who by all of their actions is totally unlovable. It's my choice. So the true success of our lives will not be judged by those who admire us for our accomplishments, but by those who attribute their wholeness to our loving them. It will come from those who have seen their true beauty and worth in our eyes. That is the true measure of a great lover.
All right, so there you have it, our first little recording from Skip about what is love. And I think just to get our conversation started, I have just a couple notes of things that kind of stood out to me in that little selection. And then I know Stephen's going to hit me with some tough questions, apparently, after that. So, I think he starts out with this idea that kindness is not love, which is really interesting and kind of like a tough sell right at the beginning. As he's talking about this, he talks about kindness can be used to manipulate. And then he gives the example of even little kids using, kind words or loving words to sort of get what they want and emotionally manipulate their parents or their loved ones. And I think we've all seen that. I think we've probably seen ourselves do it. I think we've definitely seen our kids do it. So, that begs the more interesting question, like what is love and what is manipulation? So, he asks, is our kindness to others based on our love for them, or is it because we want something from them? And I feel like a lot of times in these situations, I'm always like, Dad, you're saying it so harshly. Like, where to say it so tough, so bluntly, but like, he's right. And he uses that blunt language to kind of like jostle us out of our comfort enough to like pay attention to what he's saying, because he is right about this. And I mean, I even catch myself doing this from time to time, not necessarily with some grand machinations of manipulation, but just like, it's kind of how people get along sometimes, we say nice things to get what we want. So,
and the one of the things that jumped out to me while I was listening to that is when he talks about kids using it to manipulate parents, my brain went to, because, I'm dealing with a new 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and it went to, what do I do as a parent to get them to do things? What is the verbiage that I can slip into? And, when I'm trying to teach them these important lessons and this behavior, it's so easy to slip into this mentality of manipulation. But I have to, stop and sit back and think, is this what a loving parent should be doing?
Right.
How am I educating them in the overall concepts of life, not just please eat your peas,
Yep.
So yeah. And it's such a juxtaposition of what like the societal norms say about love and, kindness.
Right. Yeah. I think that is a good way to look at it, because little kids don't necessarily know another way or know that they're manipulating. Like, they're just doing what they've learned, and that is a good thing. Right. And good things get them more good things. So that makes sense. But for parents, it can be more manipulative. And I'm thinking about dad and mom, and I can't think of a time when I heard dad saying something kind to me or complimentary to me that felt like he was trying to get something from me. Do you know what I mean? Like, he lived this for sure. And I know not just with his kids, with everyone, but especially with us, I think he was very careful, like you're saying, to show love first. And then if that it looks like kindness or gentleness, that's great. But the motivation was to love, not to manipulate. So, I think he's maybe the best example that I have in my life of loving like that.
I was saying before we got started that like the most radical, aggressive arguments or disagreements that Dad and I ever had were just quiet, respectful debates about topics that, I just wanted more explanation on from his perspective, and he would get more explanation from me on my perspective, and we would come to some sort of respectful conclusion. Whether or not we agree with each other, it didn't matter by that point, because we both understood each other. Yeah, the outcome of love was there regardless of any sort of purposeful kindness he was putting into it, just because of his ability to live this lifestyle that he taught.
Yeah. But having said that, also he was one of the kindest people that I know. So but that kindness, like we're saying, it was an overflow of love, not manipulation. So another thing he says later in the recording is that, and we know this, love does away with fear. And then he says, love that manipulates people creates fear. And I think that's really key when you're trying to assess yourself as to whether or not the kindness or compassion that you're showing someone, your kid or whoever, if it's going to create fear in that person of, if I don't do this, they're not going to be kind to me, I'm not going to win their approval. If it's creating fear, then it's more manipulation based, versus if you're doing away with fear, then if that's the genuine love. So I thought that was a really good way of saying that, so that we can kind of assess ourselves as we're going about our relationships. Another piece he talks about in this segment is the whole "why do you love me" conversation. He talks about it between him and mom, and when they first got married or were dating, she would ask, tell me why you love me. And he would, never give her an answer. And so I think a lot of us have heard that story from him a lot of times. I know he always told it in the love seminar. He's told it other places, and I've certainly heard it a lot of times. And I can say it's profoundly influenced my marriage. like, I don't have an answer for that question for Chris. And he's never asked it because he was he came to Circle A when he was pretty young too. He was formed with the same like teaching about this and this understanding of what love is, that it really is, like Dad always says, a decision rather than based on a certain way that a person is or a certain thing that a person does. So, you know, I think this is one of the things, you know, some of the things that we learned from Dad, I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't learn that very well. Like I still got a lot of growing to do in that area, or I don't know about that thing. But this thing I can say, it's really shaped me and our marriage. And like, I don't have that fear in my marriage. So I think that's pretty awesome.
I think it's good to acknowledge that this particular topic at camp, it messes campers up and in a good way, but it messes them up because they will go home and they will reevaluate their relationships and what they want out of spouses and partners. And they will come to the conclusion that if they're going to get married to this person, that they need to come back to Circle A to hear this message as well. And it's happened like over and over with a lot of different campers over the years. And I think that it's because if you're going to pursue this mentality, it really is a far more successful venture if both partners are on the same page about that mentality,
that understanding of what love is. Yeah. Well, then he talks in this recording, he hits on a lot of stuff in these quick 10 minutes about the primary responsibility of love, which responsibility in itself is already a really big deal with Dad in all of his teaching. And in turn, it is a really big deal in my life. So like responsibility is one of my highest values, I think, mostly because of what I learned from Dad. And so the question of, is the primary responsibility of love on the lover or the one being loved? And he's
you
right.
You gotta say lovey.
He does say lovey.
Goofiest word he's ever invented.
Once in a while, he does invent very goofy things. Yeah, I don't. I will say the one being loved. But he's right that is not how most people see it. Like most people see it as, you know, I have to continue to show up to this relationship in such a way that I am worthy of the love, or that I am like doing my part, pulling my weight so that this person still wants me. And I mean, Dad pushes really hard against that, maybe harder than I would push against it, but it's good because it disrupts the way that we normally think about relationships and helps us really understand the most beautiful, the most pure form of love.
I would also say that, you know, from a purely secular perspective, a lot of relationships are based on how much that other person makes you happy.
Right.
It's just once you stop making me happy, that's it.
Right.
Or there are more like religious relationships that can be, we're going to stay together because God put us together, but I hate you.
Yep.
Just acknowledging like those perspectives.
Yep. All right. Well, I know that you've prepared some questions.
I have.
And I'm a little nervous because I'm not Dad, but I will do my best to like respond to, because, and the reason why we're choosing, go ahead.
Well, before we get into those questions, one of my favorite little quotes that was in this bit was right at the end. And he says it real fast and it's just like there and it's gone. But he says, the success of our lives is not measured by its accomplishments, but by those who attribute their wholeness by our loving them, and that they see their true beauty and worth in our eyes.
Yep.
And I just think that's a beautiful perspective on what can be accomplished with a true dedication to this type of a relationship. Yeah. But yes, I do have questions. I used to say on the podcast, cries of outrage. I wouldn't say that these are cries of outrage in particular, but they... I struggle with some of these concepts as much as anybody. And I think it's even if I might know the answer that Dad would give, it's always good to flesh it out and give more perspective to these kind of sticking points.
Yeah. And the reason we wanted to include a segment with some sticking points or questions or pushback is because we know that a lot of people, many of our listeners, many of you guys will have these questions too. And, I don't think Dad wasn't perfect. He wouldn't say he was perfect. Mom would definitely say that he is perfect because she always did and always will. But he wasn't. And he always was learning, and he was always adapting and adjusting his teaching as he learned. So he was a lifelong learner, and we want to be lifelong learners. And so, some of these questions, I'm sure, like, maybe we'll know exactly what Dad would say about it, and we'll know that that's right. And like, that'll just be the truth. And then some of them, like, I'm expecting there to be questions that we don't necessarily have answers for, or that we don't know what he would say, but it's still good to think about them together and ask them together. And so that's what we want to do with you guys in this section.
Are you ready for question number 1?
I think so.
All right, here we go. So my first question is, in listening to how he frames the responsibilities of the lover, it just reminds me a lot of other perspectives he has on you have right now exactly what you want, or that kind of mentality. And the question is, if there's a failing of the relationship, does it put that failing completely on the shoulders of that individual? Is it completely because of them that they failed at maintaining a healthy, happy, successful relationship with that other person?
That's a good question. So essentially, if the responsibility of love is on the lover, then if there's a failure in the relationship, is that the failure of the lover only, is what you're asking. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's a tough question. I think that when you live a life so committed to taking responsibility seriously, you also live a life so aware of failure. It's very interesting. And I know that Dad did, and I know that Dad struggled with this. Failure was a difficult topic for Dad, even all the way as long as he was with us. It was a difficult topic for him, and it's a difficult topic for me, because a lot of what we've learned about failure is that failure isn't bad. Like, failure isn't evil. Failure is actually necessary for our growth, right? But when we think about it in terms of a relationship, I think I would say that a failure to love is different than a failure of a relationship to thrive.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are only one person. And a relationship thriving, I think, takes two. I absolutely do. And I know that Dad would say the same thing. I think that you can love a person and not be able to be in a thriving relationship with them. And I mean, I can think of examples in my life where I'm sure I didn't do the loving perfectly, but friendships that have ended in my life, and I do take responsibility to some degree of that, but there's also a part of me that knows, like, I loved this person the best that I could, and this relationship is not going to move forward the way that I want it to, but I'm still going to love them. And that love looks like giving them the space that they need. And that love looks like speaking well about them, even when they're not in my closer circle, and things like that. So I do think that a failure to love is different than a failure of a relationship. And I think essentially that failure to love does rest on us. That is our responsibility as a singular person. I think that the relationship does take two. But I would also say that failure isn't an end, and that failure is what we learn from. So even in those relationships where I can look back and see, like, I didn't love to the best of my ability, or the best of God in me, like, I can learn from that and I can grow from that. So I think that's what I would say about that. Also, I think love desires the highest good for the other person, right? And there are times when the highest good is for that relationship to not continue. And Dad even gives examples of relationships like that in his seminars when he talks about, the people who he essentially said to, like, my life is going in this direction, your life is going in another direction, and I'm not going to come to where you are, because where you are, I don't feel is a healthy path for me. So if you're not going to come to where I am, then the best thing for us is to part company. And he has said that to people. And I have similarly said that to people. But that is desiring the highest good for that person, right? And so I think that's a way that even when relationships fail, we can still love and we can still desire their highest good.
I love that. That's a great response because, it alleviates the individual to focus on what they can control, not what they can't, and allows them to focus on how do I express my love in the correct way, regardless of the situation. That's great.
Yeah. Not like easy. It doesn't make it easy, but it does take that, maybe shame away. Like, I don't think Dad would ever want anyone to feel shame about anything that he taught. So, finding what we are responsible for and finding what we are not responsible for, I feel like is essential to our healthy living.
Right. All right. Well, are you ready for number 2?
Absolutely.
I mean, I love that answer. And I think that you encapsulated it really well. And it is kind of just a fundamental misunderstanding of what he's trying to teach there. But what you express is also, it's that context that gives comfort. So, all right, here's number 2. How do you provide, and this is probably a flawed question in its delivery, and yet I think that it's something that people will think as they hear this kind of teaching. How do you provide any sort of critical feedback or feedback in general in a relationship where this sort of ideology is the basis? Or do you just not communicate if there's problems?
So you're saying, like, if you're loving a person and your responsibility is to love them and they are doing things in the relationship that are not good or not healthy or are annoying or whatever, how do you tell them about those things without making it sound like, if you don't fix this, I won't love you anymore, basically is what you're asking? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. And I think, everything, all of this is on some sort of continuum to me of like, we can swing too hard one way or another in health. And so, you can hear something like, the primary responsibility of love is on the lover. And you can take that so far to become just completely not a genuine person and like only saying nice things to people. And then you're kind of back up to the first thing we started with, which is the manipulation. So like finding that balance of authenticity, I think, is essential in a relationship, right? And I know that Dad would say that too. So, Dad would give kids at camp the 90-day challenge of totally eliminating all criticism of the person it was hardest for them to get along with. And that, of course, is wonderful. Of course, we don't want to criticize people. I don't think there's ever a reason to criticize people. That was also to push them way out of their comfort zone, right? But in ongoing relationships where we are living with people who are not perfect, who have problems, who aren't bringing, their best self at every moment of every day, whether it's our spouses or our kids or our coworkers or whoever it is, like, how do we communicate about our own needs and about what we see in a healthy way? So, I mean, one thing I learned from Dad, which I try to use. I am still getting better at this, but I do try to use it because I know that it works, and it works not only like when the other person hears it, but it works in my head to help me keep my heart in the right place, is Dad's line about, I have a problem and I need your help. So that story he used to tell in seminar all the time about the kids at camp and their brother and sister, and their brother was ignoring the girl and she was so upset and she was blaming it all on him. And Dad, talked her through it and talked her through how to approach him about it. And basically she wanted to just go up to him and, I don't remember exactly the story, but basically say like, you're not listening to me, you're ignoring me, and it's hurting me, right? And it's all your fault. And Dad encouraged her to say it a little bit differently, which is, I have a problem and I need your help. And the boy immediately got his defensive position. What's wrong? What can I do? And so that helps. That helps just in a relationship, when you're talking with someone, to say like, I'm the one with the problem and I need your help. And it opens the door to be able to say whatever the thing is that's going on. Now, is the thing something that they're doing? Yeah, it can be. But like, you can frame your conversation about it from your perspective. When you complain every single morning, my day starts out feeling more negative than I would like it to feel. And this is creating a problem for me. Can we figure out what to do about it? Now, a lot of that is very nuanced. What inflection are you putting on your voice when you're saying these words, right? Very, very nuanced. But what really makes a difference is like the posture of your heart. Like, do you actually believe that you're the one with the problem? Because if you do, you're going to come across that way. If you're just using the words to manipulate, again, we're back to the first thing. So that's one thing. The other thing I think I learned from Dad on this is that I don't think I ever, maybe once in a while, like maybe at camp if he was correcting a kid. But as far as adults and peers, and even Mom, his wife, he didn't offer critiques to people unless they asked him for it, or unless he asked permission to do it. Like, I remember lots of times him saying to Mom, like, can I help you with something? And then she would know that meant, okay, he has observed that I'm not being very healthy about this thing, and he's going to tell me what it is, but he's asking for that permission, right? And so I think that that goes a long way in lowering defenses as well. Another thing I've learned, I don't remember if this was originally from Dad or not, but it's something I keep in my head, is that really humans can only absorb criticism on a 10-to-1 ratio. Meaning, in order for someone to actually take in and criticism is not a great word. Like, there's a word that we could use, take in the feedback, the constructive feedback, in a way that's going to help them to grow. They have to hear 10 positive things to every negative thing, which Dad was also great at. And Mom is the greatest encourager in the world. For those of you who know Susan, like, she was the best at that. And so I've tried to be better about that with my kids, in my church, because we get so comfortable with people and close with people that we feel like, well, we just have the emotional, relational equity I can share if there's a difficult thing. And we forget, we got to keep saying the positive things. We got to keep saying the good things, the encouraging things. We need to hear those things from each other. So I think when we have relationships that are flowing in encouragement, then the constructive feedback it's a lot easier to be received.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What was that? Emotional equity. That's a good, no, I love that response. That is the 10-to-1 ratio. I definitely had forgotten about. So that's another great reason to do this sort of thing where we can relearn, because it's all this content is just relearning and relearning and relearning and reapplying. No matter what stage of life you're at, it's totally different. Yeah, I love that. That's really great. Okay. The final question that I have is another one of those questions that might just have like a flawed understanding, but it's one when he delivers this, no matter the venue, it sounds the same to me. And so these thoughts initially always crop up, and then maybe he'll give something that fleshes it out more. But when he talks about never giving Susan a why, I always think, but why? Why do you love her though? Do you know? Are you hiding that from her? Or is it simply that you've voided that perspective from your mind, that you don't want to even acknowledge that there could be a why? You know, when you're pursuing a relationship with somebody, I know many people have actual physical lists of qualifications that that person needs to meet for them to pursue a relationship with them. And I would say that those are whys that person then has. And what happens if that person then doesn't match those whys as life carries on? Does that affect the relationship? So the question is it okay to have these secret whys that you love that person? Or is it, as he says, a decision and a choice?
Right. Yeah, that's a good one too. And I've wondered the same thing. Like, did he have I mean, I know he had things that he loved about mom, and he would even say that there are things I love about you, or I love it when you do this, or whatever. And he had ways that he would encourage mom about certain things that she did. So I think having things that you love about a person, 100% okay. And it's good to verbalize that. Like, that's part of the encouragement of a healthy relationship. But like the actual, like, why did he choose mom as his spouse in the first place? Like, that is a really interesting question. I think it's different for different sorts of relationships that we have. Like, for our kids, they're our kids. That's why, like, they were born out of our bodies and we're going to love them because they're our children, right? Or, you know, even for humanity in general, like, there's a certain sort of love that I hope we cultivate towards every person, inherent worth and value of a person. That why is, you know, it's a God-given why, right? So those things are different than a spouse or than like a really close friend that you're choosing to invest a lot of time with, because that is a yoking, like a joining in your life that's going to affect, you know, who you become. It's going to affect everything that you do in your life, your job, your home, everything, right? So is it okay to have a secret list?
And what happens if that list then fails and is no longer met?
Right.
I know, I don't think he touches on it in this talk in particular, but he does talk a lot about this servant-driven mentality if we're to resemble Jesus in our actions. So the idea of making a commitment, making a choice of love, and then having a list that then qualifies, well, I commit to this until, voids so much of that idea. So I want to hear your perspective on it, though, because these are just thoughts that bubble up as he speaks.
I mean, he spent a lot of time teaching about being very careful who we invest our time with. Mm-hmm. He spent a lot of time teaching about, I mean, I think we even found a teaching as we were going through preparing for this podcast, how to select your mate, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so I think he would say the front end of that decision is really important, especially when it comes to marriage, but also friendship, to say, like, if I'm going to join my life with this person, there are certain values that, like, are going to need to align. And if they don't align, it doesn't matter how attracted I am to this person. It doesn't matter how, you know, all of the feelings that I have. If the core values of life don't align, then that would be an unwise choice, right? And that's setting you up for these later situations where those values are going to come into conflict. And then you've already made a choice to make a commitment, but now that commitment is pushing against your values as a human. And so then what do you do? And that's a very, very difficult place to be. And I mean, I've seen Dad coach a lot of people through marriage counseling that have come to that place. So I think he would say number one is put the time into that decision on the front end. Don't let it be a decision based on feeling or attraction or things of that nature. Of course, feelings are important. Of course, attraction is important. But put a lot of your effort into that initial decision. But then I think he would say, like, once you have made a commitment, once you have made a decision, specifically with marriage, I think he would say, fight in all the ways that you can to continue to love that person.
Give everything you got to everything you do.
Give everything you've got to everything you do. Exactly. Now, in the case of friendship, that's a little bit different. Like we've said, we have seen Dad part ways with people who were not bringing his life in the direction he felt that it needed to be going. That's still really hard. Like, and it's still, you know, when you're talking about this secret list, like, is the secret list, I only want people around me who are going to be positive and encouraging and uplifting. So if somebody goes through a season of depression, are they no longer in my inner circle? Like, that's a really hard question to answer. And I think it takes a lot of wisdom to know what boundaries you need to be a healthy person, right? And then within those boundaries, how do you love those people to the best of your ability? Because I don't think it means you just cut those people out of your life entirely, right? But how do you love them? How do you desire their highest good while living within boundaries that keep you healthy and whole? So it's a tough question. I don't think I would call it a secret list. Like I don't think Dad would love that. I think that things you love about people is awesome. I think that being very careful in selecting your mate is really important. And then I think that loving people regardless of where they are on their journey is something that he would encourage.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but it might be the best I have today.
I love it. I love the response. I think that, these nuances are inherent in doing these kind of seminars where you're talking about these really big and deep topics, that there is going to be, there has to be these variations in how we discuss each individual relationship and how that really matters, without disregarding all of the logical points that are brought up as well. There's still this nuance. And so I think it's really great to have this opportunity to sit down and explore those. Yep. So I love these responses. And I think that it gives so much more context and comfort and I don't know about closure. I think it gives inspiration to go out and apply these different points that we talked about today. So I'm excited. I love it. I think that was a really great response to a bunch of really tough questions. I think you did an awesome job. I would expect no less because Melody, she sells herself short, but she is very competent and clear in how she verbalizes herself in these sorts of topics. And so I very much appreciate it. And I think the listeners do as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you putting the questions together too, because I know you're doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it because you've heard a lot of people process a lot of things over the years. And so I appreciate that as well. So
as being the filter for a lot of the communication resources for Dad, that exposes you to a lot of different questions that come up.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun and good and thought-provoking. And I hope that, we'll all take what we've listened to and thought about and look for ways to, like you're saying, apply it to our kids, our marriages, our friendships, our coworkers, all of these things. I know it can only lead us down a path of flourishing to contemplate and put this stuff into action. So I think we have probably gone overtime for this first episode.
This puts in perspective how challenging it was to ask him to make those daily disciplines of 5-minute lessons or 10-minute lessons. Because these things, they need that context, they need that clarity, and it's hard to summarize these ideas so succinctly. Yeah.
Well, we'll keep working at it, and hopefully next time we're back with you guys, we will have it a little bit more succinct. But we're excited to be on this journey with all of you. So we'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your likes, all of that stuff. Let us know if there are any topics from Skip that you would particularly love for us to dive into in this first season of our Reflections podcast. And we'll be back with you next time.
Awesome. We'll see you guys. Thanks for listening.